What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, September 10th. 2018 here, and start of a brand new week. All kinds of stuff going on. It's a very, very busy news day here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to put you on the air with your comments and questions. So let's get right on into it. Obviously, if you are on the eastern seaboard of the United States of America, especially in the Carolinas, you have got to be paying very close attention to the weather. Hurricane Florence strengthened from a Cat 2 to a Cat 4 hurricane in a matter of mere hours. This is a serious, serious storm, and it's due to make landfall on Thursday. So the governor of South Carolina, Henry McMaster, has ordered the evacuation of the entire 187-mile coastline of his state to start noon tomorrow. It's going to take 2 days for everybody to get on out there, and the evacuation's going to make sure residents and tourists do not stick around for the landfall. Oh, look, we'll get pictures of it. We'll be up on Instagram. We'll be famous. No, this is serious stuff. You need to basically be prepped for this storm, and if you are not on the coastline, if you're further inland, you need to be stocking up on water, storable food, meaning non-refrigerated, batteries, the usual stuff. You've been through this drill before, but this is turning out to be a really serious storm. And as if the people in the Carolinas do not have enough grief, there are two more hurricanes lined up already, Isaac and Helene, that may well impact somewhere along the eastern seaboard. That's the difference between the Atlantic hurricanes and the Pacific hurricanes. In the Atlantic, once they spin up, they're probably going to hit somewhere. Here in the Pacific, around Hawaii, we're just this little tiny, pimple in the middle of the ocean. And so most of the storms miss us. Unfortunately, that's not going to be our case. Hurricane Olivia, which is downgrading into a tropical storm, is going to be here over our heads on Wednesday. The center of the storm will be south of us, but we're expecting it's actually probably going to be a lot rougher than Hurricane Lane was. So after the show today, I'm going to go back and do the drill again, get everything tied down, get all the emergency supplies on out for that one. We have another storm aimed kind of at us. It's Paul. That one is expected to miss us to the north. Okay, so please hunker down, be safe. Don't take any chances with any of these adverse weather events. Let's take a phone call from Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Did you hear John Bolton today speaking about the International Criminal Court?
Yes, I did.
And what did you think of that?
Well, we know that going even back before the war on Iraq, the United States was trying to take steps to make sure that none of its top military officers or politicians could be hauled before the International Criminal Court for war crimes. And as we now know, war crimes have been committed. People were being tortured to death during Iraq. They're using white phosphorus over Syria. And the United States government, like Israel, wants to be above the law. They want to do whatever they feel that they want to do and not be held accountable for any of it.
Right. And do you think anyone's going to do anything about the fact that America does what they want to do, just like Israel? Do you think anyone's going to intervene?
I don't know where this is going to go. There's going to be a breaking point where the rest of the world is going to say, it's going to be painful, but this must stop. But again, I see the United States government heading toward a Soviet Union-style collapse, and they're getting just as bullying and belligerent and war-happy as the Soviet Union was in the last couple of years of its existence. They were making up for all their domestic shortcomings by going on the warpath and saying, well, we can't fix our own country, but by golly, we're a mighty military power.
Right. The other thing, what do you think about this government, the United States, shutting down the Palestinian consulate in Washington, D.C.?
Well, that was because the Palestinians are trying to take Israel before the ICC and The Hague for their war crimes. And the U.S. is determined to prevent that from happening.
So they're going to punish them by shutting it down?
Absolutely.
Right. And the final thing, you mentioned about the hurricanes that's coming about. Michael, where is the money going to come from as far as FEMA, that's broke, to help these people?
I don't know where it's going to come from. I'm hoping that local charities are going to step up. But I'll tell you, from what they're describing about Florence, the coast of South Carolina is really, really going to get slammed, especially those outer banks. They could literally get wiped off the map.
Right. Isn't South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, isn't that the Bible Belt?
It's part of the Bible Belt, but the Bible Belt extends down into Georgia and out to Tennessee and that other whole area. But I see where you're going with this. Looking at all these storms and disasters that have hit the United States lately, like our volcano and so forth, one might think that the deity is not very pleased with the United States foreign policy.
Bingo. All right, Michael, take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And following up on Jim's phone call, the United States is now basically cutting off from the International Criminal Court. And they're declaring they will use any means to shield their citizens and allies from war crimes probes, which is telegraphing the fact they're going to be committing more war crimes. And that's an outright declaration. It's a declaration of total war. Anything goes. Anything needed to win will be done regardless of international laws, like the use of white phosphorus here. Okay, so the U.S. is really cranking up the propaganda campaign against Syria, Iran, and Russia. And basically, they're now saying that the purpose of this advance by the Syrian Arab Army into Idlib is specifically to destroy civilians and civilian infrastructure, because Idlib is where all the Syrians who refuse to live under Bashar al-Assad have fled. So they're back to this whole thing about, the Syrian people hate Bashar al-Assad, which is nonsense, because every time the Syrian army has cleared out a district of Syria from all the terrorists, the Syrian people just move right on back in. They're clearly not afraid that Assad is going to do anything to them. So apparently back on the 7th, Nikki Haley was there at the UN, saying that when Russia and the Assad regime say they want to counter terrorism, they actually mean they want to bomb schools and hospitals and homes. They want to punish the civilians who had the courage to rise up against Assad. And then she said that the Assad regime must halt the offensive on Idlib because it will undermine peace talks. There are no peace talks. The U.S. agenda is very clear. Assad must go, and Assad does not want to go. Now, setting all the propaganda aside, and there's going to be a lot of it. In fact, folks, in the next couple of days, I'd get the hip waiters out if I were you, because they're just pouring this stuff out by the truckload. But meanwhile, Syrian and Russian warplanes are pounding the terrorist centers in Hama and Idlib. Heavy assaults. It is really, really ramped up. There are air attacks. There are artillery strikes hitting terrorist positions in the village of Skik, Kafr Ain, Al Tamana, Abedin, and Khan Sekun in southern Idlib. And apparently a lot of the military equipment that was being provided to the terrorists by Western nations has now been destroyed. Talk about a waste of your money here. Apparently, Russian Marines have landed on the Syrian shores in another massive Mediterranean drill. Now, Russia's main Mediterranean drill is actually officially over, but Russia is saying they're going to stick around just to make sure that somebody doesn't try to do something while Syria cleans up the mess in Idlib. So they're still out there exercising and basically trying to hold off the United States to deter U.S. aggression. And by the way, a little reminder, as all the propaganda is pouring on out, YouTube has banned all Syrian channels, including the Syrian state-run media. So right now, those same people who are saying that you should not listen to Alex Jones are making sure that you will not hear Syria's side of the story when it's claimed there's going to be a huge gas attack against people. Now, the rebels are ramping up their attacks as well. They're the ones who are actually killing civilians. And it's just a horrible, horrible tragedy. Germany has announced they may join possible airstrikes on Syria if chemical weapons are used by Damascus. France is saying exactly the same thing. Well, that right there, along with Bolton's talk about a harsh response if chemical weapons are going to be used, that right there tells you it's a bogus story. Assad doesn't have a reason to use chemical weapons. He's all but won the war. He doesn't need to use chemical weapons. It's a weapon of last resort. And if Assad does not want to be bombed by Germany and France and by the United States, then he's not going to use chemical weapons. Somebody is going to plant the chemical weapons for him. Boom. Oh, look what Assad has done. Assad has done. Let's go kill him. Erdogan is saying that Turkey will not watch the killings in Idlib from the sidelines, so it looks like they're getting ready to step on in as well. And as I mentioned just now, John Bolton is warning that the U.S., France, and Great Britain will launch a much stronger response to any chemical weapons attack in Syria. Okay, John, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA's torture centers. It just doesn't make sense. Assad doesn't have a reason to use chemical weapons, and he's got a lot of reasons not to. This is going to be another fake like the last two turned out to be. What's making it even more dangerous is the U.S. is not ruling out strikes on Russian and Iranian targets if there is a response to the coming false flag chemical attack. Now that is going to be very, very serious, actually mixing it up with the Russians. And I suspect that Trump's advisors are telling him, oh, the Russians don't have a stomach for a fight. They'll back down. They'll just quit. Now, the other day, on Friday, in fact, there was a very serious incident where U.S. forces fired live munitions near a Russian position to send a warning. And that is really a provocation. Now, the U.S. is just saying it was just a live fire exercise. It just sort of happened to go near where the Russians are. But the Russians should take note anyway. So they're really pushing this. Now, Russia, on the other hand, is saying they have to react to aggression because what's happened is Idlib, while it was a de-escalation zone, the terrorists basically built fortifications. They have armed the place. They've turned it into a defensive redoubt. So they were breaking the rules of the de-escalation zone all along. Now, you've probably heard of this organization, the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. It sounds like a really good organization, and they've sent an open letter to Donald Trump basically saying, don't be surprised when the Russians shoot back. And they're talking about these Russian missile-armed naval and air units are deployed in unprecedented numbers to engage those tempted to interfere with Syrian and Russian forces in Idlib. And they're assuming that Donald Trump has been briefed on that, but they're concerned that Trump's advisors tend to be dangerously dismissive of Russian capabilities and intentions. Russia knows a war is coming with the United States, and I think they'd rather fight it in Syria than on the outskirts of Moscow. Trump is getting bad advice on this. Well, once again, the official reason for the U.S. to be in Syria has changed once again. Originally, it was we're going to save those poor Syrians from the evil tyrant. Then it was going to be Assad is gassing his people. Then it was we're not really at war with Syria. We're there to get ISIS and al-Qaeda. And now that ISIS and al-Qaeda are all but gone, they're back to shouting Assad is gassing his own people. And the new U.S. plan is for a permanent occupation of Syria by U.S. forces, for Iran to be kicked out of Syria, and for regime change in Damascus. So as bad as things are going on the agenda, they still haven't given up. All right. Article coming out of Mint Press News. Pompeo's fingerprints are all over this new Syrian agenda. of permanent occupation, ejection of Iran, and regime change in Damascus. And Trump seems to have just basically embraced this. Yeah, let's just go change the government of this other country. I wonder how Trump can feel about that, knowing that there are so many people within the United States working right now to change our government, to get a regime change, to get Trump out of the Oval Office and somebody else in. One would think that Trump might be a little bit sensitive to that issue applied to other leaders of nations, but apparently not. He hasn't made the psychic connection. All right, let's take another phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, we keep saying Trump's getting bad advice. Maybe the conclusion is Trump's just bad at this point.
It could be.
I mean, Mike, yeah, the ICC, right, pulling out of that. I mean, come on. This tells you all about us, the British. Mike, it makes me laugh, though, about that phony Nova.
Hello?
Going shopping, knowing all the, what a joke this whole thing is. What a bunch of setup. This whole thing is a setup to blame Russia. We're headed for the war, Mike. I mean, it's coming because you hit anything Russian, they'll respond. And let me tell you, when they respond, they're not going to respond. They're going to go all out because they're going to have to lay out a knockout blow on that.
Yeah. Well,
and then
I
the
would
US
hope
gonna
not.
have to make,
it depends on how far the U.S. wants to escalate. If they're really going to start shooting at Russian assets in Syria, maybe they can keep this just in Syria. But if the U.S. pushes any further, from the point of view of Russia, they're looking at the U.S. government as being very unstable and very unpredictable. They're not exactly sure who is calling the shots over here and who actually has the keys to the nuclear weapons. And that's going to make them a little trigger happy.
It's the not knowing who's running our government that's going to give them a super itchy trigger finger. And Mike, you know what's the joke of the thing? Like, you're going to start a world war because of terrorists that are. I mean, this whole thing does not make any sense at all if you think about. And for anybody calling in saying Trump is a lost cause at this point. I mean, my God, we're at this point. There's going to be another gas attack. You know that, right? I mean, it's
of course. Of course, everybody in the region is saying, they know that the Syrian rebels are getting the materials together. They've apparently kidnapped a bunch of people that they're going to have as civilian victims, and they're going to murder all of these people, take a lot of pictures, and say Assad did it. And nobody's going to believe them, but that won't make any difference to the United States. They have their official justification for escalating the war in Syria.
And then the Syrian videos won't be taken off YouTube. They'll have the White Helmets videos on there showing like the phony gas attacks or the ones that the terrorists did. It's amazing. Like, Assad got rid of his weapons. That's been, the U.S. even said that. They're all brought to the U.S. ship. They were destroyed on the U.S. ship. But it's not about that anymore. It never was about that.
No, it never was. It was all about regime change, about, taking over Syria, putting in a U.S. puppet government to run Syria for the benefit of American corporations. There was that dispute over the pipeline that Israel wanted to run through Syria so that they could send the oil and gas they're stealing from under the Golan Heights to Europe. And obviously, Syria was not going to be very happy with that, helping Israel make a profit off of stolen goods like that. But it's coming. In fact, I'm surprised that the gas attack hasn't happened yet.
Well, the Russian drills just ended, so they're staying there. I figured they're going to stay there somewhat.
Yeah, they are. All right, well, listen, Dustin, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And, folks, we're not running that spot asking for donations just for the fun of it. It's a serious situation right now, and Republic Broadcasting needs your help. What really happened needs your help. if we're going to continue this fight, if we're going to try and head off this disastrous rush to a war, which is probably going to end with the use of nuclear weapons. So we need your help. The postal address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number to make a debit or credit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during normal business hours, extension 3 at all other times. The network thanks you. What really happened thanks you. All right, let's turn back to the phones here. Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha, Kevin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. How are you doing today?
We're hanging in there, waiting for the storm.
There you go. I wanted to call in and talk to you about John Bolton. John Bolton is your author behind the op-ed piece that was in the last week. Was it the New York Times?
You mean the one claiming to be the anonymous White House official?
Yes, it is John Bolton. It is not Mike Pence. It is John Bolton.
What makes you think so?
Author, and this has come. Steve Pachinik did some type of psychological evaluation and figured that this person had went to Yale. Same thing as Mike Pence. Also, this also ties in together with the 25th Amendment coup type thing going on. It ties in with, if they do pull the 25th Amendment, you have Mike Pence. Mike Pence is compromised due to being a swinger with Trump and also John Bolton back in his days in college. So Pence will step down. And then who are you left with? Paul Ryan. You might as well have Obama.
Okay. That's an interesting theory. I don't think Pence is going to be convinced to step down. I mean, he's being low-key about it, but I think he's drooling at the chance that he's going to be able to sit in that Oval Office for a while.
I think you're right. And the only reason why I'm saying that he would step down is because the compromising stuff that they have on him. He is right. You are right. He's sitting back quietly, and I bet you he's chomping at the bit to get in there. Yep. But he is controlled, and that's how he's controlled. Is the confirmation things with him swinging with John Bolton and Bush Jr. or whatever, whatever his name was. But it's Bolton is the one. Bolton is where all of this war thing is coming from. He's a war hawk. Absolutely a war hawk. And this is where everything's coming from out of what you're seeing with this attacks and everything. It's Bolton. It's John Bolton. It's not Trump. It's Bolton. And it is Trump getting bad advice.
Yes. No question about that. I'm not sure I'm ready to commit to saying that Bolton is the anonymous senior White House source. And to be very honest, I've actually stopped paying attention to that as being kind of a pointless distraction. And I understand from Trump's point of view, it's a very serious breach. But, you know, presidents have always had to deal with leakers and people who speak out of turn. Obama had to deal with it. He was giving his staff lie detector tests. Richard Nixon had his plumbers unit. It is a shame that a president goes into office not being able to trust his own staff. That's got to be a serious impediment.
It is. And the other question that I have, when this thing does unravel, and it is unraveling, who and what type of plan can we, the people, put in place to pick the pieces up and have some type of constitutionality form of government back to how the republic is supposed to be? Do we have people in place?
We have to stand up, I mean, as a people, and simply say the professional politicians are out, kick them out of the country, and, you know, basically start all over again. And I would say let's start with the Constitution, and the first 13 amendments is a good place to start. And it'll take a little refinement. But if our government collapses and we let the same old politicians form a new one, it's going to be even worse than what we've got now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why I'm asking, do we have people in positions for whenever this does come down? And if not, how do we get the people there?
If you're asking if we have people who are thinking about a new American republic already in the government, the answer is no. But there are certainly a lot of people out here in the independent media who've been talking about this for years. And I would imagine that they would at least provide inspiration for the creation of a new nation.
Organization seems like one thing that we need to do, because I would love to get together everybody that has this new American country idea for when this does unravel. I think we need to be organized and have some type of plan on paper for when this does come down, and pick the pieces up and put our country back together.
You are absolutely right. The time to start planning is now, and I've been working on a book called The Blueprint for the New America. I don't get enough time to work on it, but you're right. We need to start organizing a new American people and start networking and saying, what are your ideas, and start basically putting together a blueprint to go at a moment's notice. Anyway, need to let you go, Kevin. We got to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as I mentioned in one of the earlier phone calls, there are reports that 2 U.S. F-15 jets carried out strikes over Deir ez-Zor using white phosphorus, which is banned under international law. And that's probably the reason why the U.S. is now pushing away from the International Criminal Court. They're willing to commit war crimes to get what they want. Now, white phosphorus, the only allowed use for it is as a smokescreen to cover a retreat or as a signaling device. But according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, these F-15s basically just laid on to Deir ez-Zor, starting major fires all over. And this is a violation of the 1949 Geneva Convention. You're not allowed to do that kind of stuff. But that's why the U.S. is trying to basically get away from the International Criminal Court. They know they're committing war crimes. They don't want to be punished for them here. So you've probably seen it all over the news. This originated with Wall Street Journal. It's been picked up everywhere that President Assad has personally approved the use of chlorine gas in an offensive against the country's last major rebel stronghold, U.S. officials are saying. Yes, Assad is doing this himself. He's personally involved. In fact, he's mixing up the chlorine gas in his bathtub as we speak. And nobody is buying this. It just doesn't make any sense that Assad would do this. He's winning the war. He doesn't need to use chemical weapons of any kind. Who benefits if there's a chemical weapon attack? It gives the United States an excuse to launch another attack and try and turn the situation around. And we're running the risk of actually going to war against Russia. Now, Russia, let's take a look. Setting the nuclear arsenal aside, setting Russia's new wonder weapons aside, Russia has not really been engaged in all that much warfare over the last 18 years. The U.S. has been engaged in warfare all over the globe. The vehicles are worn down, the stockpiles are drawn down, the troops are worn out. They're dispirited, they're demoralized. They know these wars are not serving a moral purpose. It's all about corporate greed. The U.S. may have the advantage in terms of sheer numbers of military assets, but Russia has the advantage in morale. They've got the high ground. They know the moral right is on their side. And again, they're not going to let any military get as close to Moscow as the Nazis did in World War II. So I'm in agreement with those veteran professionals organization. Don't be surprised if the Russians start shooting. And of course, from the U.S. point of view, it's a question of who shoots first, because whoever shoots first will be paraded around as the bad guy. Well, I think the U.S. firing warning shots at the Russians on Friday, that strikes me as whoever shot first. And anybody who's studying the history this time is going to know who the aggressor party was. So they've got the propaganda out there, starting with the Wall Street Journal, saying, absolutely they know Assad is doing this. Really? How do they know? The answer is, oh, we can't tell you. Well, it would reveal methods and assets and stuff. So anyway, story coming on out of Fort Russ. The White Helmets organization is planning to use family members as hostages of militants who were willing to reconcile with the Syrian government in a staging of chemical weapons attacks. Basically, this is going to serve two purposes. One, it's going to be the false flag chemical weapon attack to allow the U.S. to come on back in, along with France and Great Britain. Although we're now hearing that Merkel's coalition partner is saying, no, they will not go along with this. But still, it's a serious situation. And what it is, a lot of the militants have accepted Assad's offer of amnesty. They surrendered their weapons, and they were allowed to basically just pretty much go on their way. And so the White Helmets have been taking family members of these former militants hostage, and that's who they're going to use in this staged chemical weapon attack as a form of revenge. And according to Fort Russ, this provocation will be held very, very soon. And I'm surprised it hasn't already happened. Because if they wait too long, Syria and Russia, they've got the initiative in Idlib and Hama. So there was a story that came out of Washington's blog, and it talks about false flags. And it's something you were never supposed to know even existed. But you do now. You know that false flags are a reality. And there are some 46 cases where governments that used false flags have officially acknowledged it. And I imagine for every one that they've admitted actually happened, there have been dozens and dozens, possibly even hundreds, that are still classified top secret. And we have that article there, and there are just so many examples. For example, Japanese troops set off an explosion on a train in 1931 and blamed it on China to justify the invasion of Manchuria. A major with the Nazi SS admitted during the Nuremberg trials that under orders from the chief of the Gestapo, he and other Nazi operatives faked attacks on their own people and resources, which were blamed on the Poles to justify the invasion of Poland. Nazi General Franz Halder also testified at the Nuremberg trials that Nazi leader Hermann Goering admitted to setting the Reichstag fire, which was then blamed on the communists. All right, let's pull forward here a little more recently. Undercover Israeli soldiers admitted in 2005 to throwing stones at other Israeli soldiers so they could blame it on the Palestinians as an excuse to crack down on peaceful protests by the Palestinians. In 2007, Quebec police admitted that thugs carrying rocks to a peaceful protest were actually undercover Quebec police officers. Well, they had to admit that one because that was discovered by people at the scene who saw them basically getting into their costumes here. In 2008, a U.S. Army Special Operations Field Manual recommended that the U.S. military use surrogate non-state groups such as paramilitary forces, individuals, businesses, foreign political organizations, resistant or insurgent organizations, expatriates, transnational terrorism adversaries, disillusioned transnational terrorism members, black marketers, and other political desirables. That was the beginning of the U.S. using groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda to carry out their dirty work. In 2009, at the G20 protests in London, a British member of parliament saw plainclothes police officers attempting to incite the crowd to violence. And of course, we all know about the various other lies used to start wars, like the Lusitania wasn't smuggling weapons to Great Britain. The Spanish mine blew up the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. Saddam's nuclear weapons. That's always the one to go back to when you get this, oh, the government would never lie to us. Yeah, they lie to us all the time. You're not supposed to know about it. but you know about it now. Apparently, the terrorist top chemical weapons expert has fled Syria into Turkey. And this was the expert of Tahrir al-Sham Hayat, or the Al-Nusra Front. So he's getting out while the getting is good. He obviously doesn't think that things are going to go very well. Now, here's an interesting little story. This was a YouTube video. And the headline is, U.S. and British forces trapped in Idlib, Syria. And the news is coming out saying there are allegedly 200 U.S. and British forces trapped in Idlib. And the U.S. media is claiming that Russia has said they will attack the U.S. base at Al-Tanf. Now, what Russia has said is they're going to attack the terrorists who are near Al-Tanf. And those British and U.S. forces are not trapped. I am sure that the Syrian government will let them leave anytime they want to. Now, maybe somebody is thinking that the chemical weapons false flag is not going to play in Peoria, which it isn't. You know, third time's a charm. Fool me once and all of that. So maybe this is going to be the new excuse for the U.S. to go in there. Oh, we have to save our brave soldiers trapped in Idlib. The U.S. Navy is carrying out new military exercises in the Persian Gulf as regional tensions rise. And this is the U.S. Fifth Fleet Theater Countermine and Maritime Security Exercise Commander Scott Stearney is saying the exercise will involve regional and global allies to illustrate that the U.S. and our partners stand ready to ensure the freedom of navigation and the free flow of commerce wherever international law allows. And according to Stearney, U.S. allies need to be ready to address anything that threatens our interest in our U.S. ships, adding that Iran's activities in the Persian Gulf and Red Sea areas are promoting instability. So for those of you who love a wonderful sense of irony, the United States has their ships halfway around the planet sailing just off of other nations' borders, and yet Iran is supposedly creating instability in the region. I don't think so. I think if the United States wasn't poking its nose into other nations' business all over the globe, the world would be a much more stable place. Meanwhile, over at the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Director General, Yukiya Amano, is saying that Iran is still in full compliance with the 2015 nuclear deal, that Iran is still playing by all the rules. They're keeping their commitments to the remaining signers of the nuclear deal. And the only one who's violated the nuclear deal is Donald Trump. Last May, when he just said we're getting on out and we're going to have another deal that Iran will give up their non-existent nuclear weapons and they'll surrender their long-range ballistic missiles and they'll crawl on their hands and knees over to Israel and kiss Bibi Netanyahu's feet. And again, the fact that Iran is in compliance with the P4 plus one agreement is not being reported in the American corporate media. In fact, none of this stuff is in the corporate media. Americans shooting sort of near toward the Russians. You know, everybody is still talking about who is anonymous in the White or in the New York Times. Who's behind all of that? We're being contentized really, really strongly. And the reason for that is so that when the false flag chemical weapons attack happens, it'll have an increased shock value. Everybody's going to be relaxed. The news has been slow on the corporate media. And then, boom, gas attack, war in Syria is on. War with Russia may be on. Okay, we're going to take another phone call here. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Mike, one thing, too, I don't know if you mentioned it, Operation Northwoods.
I didn't in this list, but I've mentioned it before.
Okay, and I mean, if that doesn't show that this country isn't capable of doing something like that, I don't know what is. The other thing is, as far as they're miscalculating, the powers that be are miscalculating the American people. They think people are going to rush into the military the way they did after 9/11 and believe it. There's too much information out there. They're going to need the people they really got to convince to join the military, the young people, okay?
Yeah.
They may get the older people to watch, mainstream or corporate media and think that they're getting the truth. But they're going to need to get the young people to join, and I don't think they're going to get them. And if that happens again, like I told you before, I think we're talking draft. When we're talking draft, I think you're going to have riots that are going to take this country apart.
I think you're right, but actually, they're getting ready to hold a conference on that very topic about the draft. Should the draft registration be ended? Should it be extended? Should the actual draft begin? So they're starting to talk around having a draft again. These people are crazier than I think. They think that that's going to work. If they think that, even if they were able to get people to be drafted in, you had during the Vietnam War, you had officers and senior enlisted men, being shot in the back by their own troops. I mean, what we call fragging. You had that. It's going to even be worse now. I mean, people are not going to go for this stuff. The average young person in this country knows what's going on. They don't get their news from the corporate media. They will not. People will not put up with this. I'm telling you, Mike. I don't know what these people are thinking. I don't know if they're capable of thinking. By the way, I think John Bolton. I tend to agree. The guy who said that. I heard Steve Pachenik talking about that too, and I happen to. I kind of agree that Bolton is probably behind a lot of this stuff. And Bolton is a very dangerous individual. Yes.
He's a cowardly draft officer from the Vietnam War. But he's, like I said, he loves war at the same time, as long as he's not in it. And he is very dangerous, much too influential. And you know who we got to thank in a lot of respects for getting him into the White House there is Breitbart. They were pushing this guy from the get-go. They were pushing Bolton. The whole Breitbart news site is pretty much of a neocon site. It's very pro-Zionist, very pro-interventionist, despite what they say. And they were the ones that were really pushing Bolton. So for this job, and they bragged about it. So I'm telling you, we are in trouble, Mike. I don't know what's going to happen. I heard about that yesterday about the bombing using Willie Pete, white phosphorus.
Yep.
And I was listening to Duran. I don't know if you know that site, the Duran. You can get it on net. You can get it on YouTube still, and they're very interesting people. I don't know if they're from Greece or the United States. They sound like Americans, but they didn't know whether this was really true or not, whether that bombing actually took place. But,
okay, well, I have to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, as we mentioned earlier in the program, the new agenda for Syria is a permanent U.S. occupation at huge cost, for Iran to be forcibly ejected out of Syria, and for a regime change. So they're back to that. Assad must go. Assad must go. Assad is bad. Assad passes wind in the elevators. Assad has waxy yellow buildup on his kitchen floors. He steals socks out of your dryer, and on and on and on. The only problem with that is every time the U.S. extends the so-called war on terror, the terrorists seem to get stronger. And according to the State Department, Trump has signed on to this new policy to stay in Syria. Remember when he was campaigning, he was going to bring our troops home. Of course, every candidate says, I'm going to end the wars and bring the troops home. Obama said that back in 2008. Now, there's no UN mandate. There's no invitation from the Syrian government. This is an outright military incursion into somebody else's country, which I think could be seen by that country as an act of war. But that becomes a recruiting device for the terrorists, real terrorists, inside Syria. If the U.S. isn't there, nobody's going to want to go on out and join a terrorist organization. They're going to want to bake bread and go to the marketplace and sell product and take care of their family. Nobody just gets up one morning and says, there's nothing good on TV today, I'm going to be a terrorist. They become a terrorist because there is a threat to their country, their family, their friends, their way of life. Whether you call them a terrorist or an unconventional fighter or a freedom fighter, it's the same thing. As long as the United States is staying in Syria, or for that matter, Afghanistan, or any of these other countries, it is going to stimulate the creation of these opposing groups, and they will get stronger and stronger. Now, over in Iraq, there is this politician, Haidar Abadi, and he's the U.S. favorite candidate to be prime minister. And apparently it's not going to work on out because of the riots that caused arson around the southern city of Basra and burned down the walls of the Iranian consulate in the city. Now, the inhabitants were rioting for their justified demands, fresh water, electricity, job opportunities, and infrastructure. But as we postulated last week, sponsored groups with different agendas mixed with the crowds to burn down offices, ambulances, a government building, and school associated with al-Hashd al-Sha'bi and other anti-U.S. political groups. This mob behavior forced Syed Muqtada al-Sadr, the leader of the MPs, to drop his political partner Abadi and put an end to his political career. So that is pretty much the end of that. So is the U.S. going to go back on into Iraq? Maybe. We'll be right back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. Over this last weekend, the UN brokered peace talks regarding Yemen broke down, and the fighting has resumed around the port city of Hodeidah. And it's getting very intense. 84 people have been killed, consisting of 11 of the Saudi soldiers and 73 of the Houthis. And apparently a lot of people were also wounded. So that's going on. And part of the problem was the rebels refused to leave Yemen for the talks in Geneva, saying the United Nations had not met their demand, including a plane to transport their wounded to nearby Oman and a guarantee their delegation would be allowed to return to the capital, Sana'a. Because Saudi Arabia, which is controlling the airspace over Yemen, had previously indicated they weren't going to allow the Houthis even to leave Yemen to go to the peace talks. Well, that caused a bit of a stir, and the UN said, no, you've got to let them go to Geneva. But for some reason, the Houthi delegates were thinking they could be up there in Geneva and stuck there and not get back. That's how little they trust the Saudis. Now, interestingly enough, apparently there is a growing argument, if you will, regarding the continuation of the Yemen war between the Saudi Arabian King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And it's a rare show of discord, but basically, say the war is becoming unpopular in Saudi Arabia. It's costing a lot of money. It's not really bringing anything to Saudi Arabia. And it's actually causing a lot of harm because Spain's defense ministry has now canceled the delivery of laser-guided bombs to the Saudi Arabian government, specifically noting that Riyadh's war in Yemen has seen some 10,000 people killed and an estimated 5 million people displaced. So it describes this war as between the government headed by exiled President Abd Rabbu Mansur Hadi and the Houthi political opposition. Well, Hadi was the installed puppet from the previous U.S. intervention, and the people of Yemen didn't like the way he was running their country for somebody else's benefit. So they basically kicked him out. That's why he's in exile. The Houthis are the actual government. of Yemen. Nobody wants to acknowledge it. They're trying to bring back the internationally approved government. Well, you know something? I remember back there in that Declaration of Independence where it said, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed, meaning the people within the country itself. And all of a sudden we have these other countries coming on in saying, we'll decide what government you're going to have. Apparently there's a group of people, a group of countries already meeting to decide on a new constitution for Syria. Isn't that up to the people of Syria? So again, it's a covert neocolonialism here. The United States has now authorized $1.2 billion with a B in military aid to Egypt. This was done by Mike Pompeo, overriding previous human rights concerns that had held up the funding. Apparently, Pompeo's out there. Human rights, human schmites. Here's your money. Go for it. Now, remember what I was saying about the longer the U.S. occupies countries, the stronger the resistance will get? Here's an interesting story. This was in no less than the Los Angeles Times. And it's saying 17 years after 9/11, Al-Qaeda may be stronger than ever. Remember, George Bush was vowing to starve terrorists from funding, turn them one against the other, drive them from place to place until there is no refuge or rest. But far from vanquishing Al-Qaeda and its various franchises, U.S. policies in the Mideast have encouraged their spread. Most notably, the fact that the U.S. has been arming and supplying Al-Qaeda to use as a proxy against Assad. Now, we had a caller on the line about this a little bit earlier. The Trump administration is going to shutter the Palestine Liberation Organization's office in Washington, D.C., because the Palestinians are trying to bring a lawsuit against Israel to the International Criminal Court. And Trump has gone further, saying that they're going to threaten the International Criminal Court with sanctions. And John Bolton came on out saying the United States will always stand with our friend and ally Israel, no matter what terrible atrocities they do, because what's an atrocity among friends? I mean, really, you know, get real here. All right. Couple of very interesting, bizarre stories. We're going to first of all do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining the network. The Prime Minister of Abkhazia, Gennady Gugalia, died in a traffic accident on Saturday evening. And here's what's interesting. Nobody else in the motorcade was injured. But he died in the accident. Nobody else was injured. That strikes me as a little unlikely. Meanwhile, over in Moldova, their president, Igor Dodon's motorcade, collided with a truck on the Stresani-Kalasari highway. He is now in the hospital. Two so close together? I'm not so sure. Okay, we're going to go back to the phones here to Errol in the Netherlands. Aloha, Errol. Welcome to the show. Long time no hear from. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello, Mike. Oh, hold on. I got an... Yes, hello. It's a long time no speak. I just want to say that the Dutch, they don't give any more financial support to the moderate rebels / opposition. So that's a good thing.
Yes.
And it's just announced. So I think, and they say... In the article in NOS, that's Nederlandse Omroepstichting, they say, dus the Dutch Broadcast Stichting, whatever, they say defeat is imminent. So they also see that it's coming. So I also see that it's coming. And I find it's a positive thing. And I hope America and John Bolton, what the funny I was laughing at John Bolton. John Bolton said, well, if you try us, at the ICC, at the International Criminal Court, we're going to sanction you. So John Bolton wants to sanction the International Criminal Court. Well, that's something new. It's not a country.
Well, what he's threatening to do is sanctioning any nations that try and take the U.S. or Israel to the International Criminal Court, which I think qualifies as a global obstruction of justice.
But for John Bolton to say it, I find it ironic. It's perfect timing, don't you think?
Yes.
Thank you for taking my call, Mike. Have a nice.
All right. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Over in North Korea, they're having a big celebration for their 70th anniversary of the country's founding. And as is usually the case when they have these celebrations every year, there's a military parade. What was interesting is this parade did not include any of the long-range ballistic missiles. They were notably absent, maybe dropping a hint that Kim Jong-un is willing to back down on some of these issues. Now, you wouldn't know that to read or see the American corporate media because a report came back from North Korea from one of the negotiators that Kim Jong-un hasn't started denuclearization. And the media immediately turned that around to Kim Jong-un refusing to denuclearize. Well, the diplomat, the negotiator, was even quoted in the actual article saying Kim Jong-un is waiting for a sign from the United States that they intend to keep their half of the bargain. And I said right from the beginning, this is going to be the impasse. Kim Jong-un has made some concessions. He shut down the nuclear test site. He's torn down the missile testing stand. He sent back the remains of U.S. soldiers from the start of the Korean War. He's allowing people from South Korea to travel to North Korea to see people they haven't seen since the DMZ went up. And he and Moon Jae-in are talking about permanently reopening the rails and roads over the DMZ. It's going to be a mess to clean up under there, but they're talking about it. They're pushing toward reunification. And that's what's going on. But the U.S. is still out there screaming, no, North Korea, you have to do what we want, and then we'll do something nice. But Kim Jong-un is waiting for the U.S. to do something to show their commitment to their half of the deal, like to stop having all these naval drills off the coastline and to formally declare an end to the Korean War. And the U.S. just insists on doing what the U.S. wants to do. And that does not sit very well with the Asian mindset. The U.S. attitude is we'll go anywhere in the world we want to and do whatever we want to, and that will be the end of it. And the reason the United States does not want a formal end to the Korean War is because everybody would say, okay, that's another one the United States did not win. It's been 70 years. I think it's time to let this one go. The U.S. government has this habit of just holding a grudge forever when things don't go their way. I mean, look how long they've kept the blockade, the embargo against Cuba over the Bay of Pigs, proving the U.S. can hold a grudge forever. Now, there's been a bit of a dust-up down in Venezuela. It was revealed over the weekend in the media that the Trump administration was holding meetings with opposition leaders, rebellious officers inside Venezuela's army to try and urge them to carry out a military coup against Maduro. And it was an astonishing revelation to go public. And Venezuela has now announced plans to hold a massive march tomorrow against Washington's now confirmed attempts to meddle in that country's internal affairs. See, it's bad when other countries do it to us, but it's okay when the U.S. does it to other countries because we're the exceptional country. We're the indispensable country. We're the greatest nation on earth. We have a right to just meddle with other people's countries, but they shouldn't meddle with us. Alrighty, getting on back to the anonymous New York Times op-ed author. Everybody is out there with their speculations here. As that caller mentioned, John Bolton's name is now on the list. But Mike Allen of Axios is saying his analysis, whoever it is, they're not that senior. That the media, anytime they're quoting an anonymous source within the government, they'll use the word senior to make it sound much more important. But this could be a very low-level person. Now, Michael Caputo says he knows who wrote the anti-Trump New York Times op-ed, and it's actually a woman. So, Judicial Watch has now issued a statement on the Department of Justice Inspector General report on the Clinton email investigation and denounced it as destroying the credibility of the Department of Justice and the FBI. Really? I didn't know they had any left. But basically, the report confirms what Judicial Watch investigated and revealed for nearly 2 years. The Obama Department of Justice and FBI investigation of Clinton was rushed, half-baked, rigged, and irredeemably compromised by anti-Trump and pro-Clinton bias and actions. By the way, little story is surfacing. You know when they seized the files off of Anthony Weiner's laptop? Apparently, there was something that was described in the James Comey files, the FBI files, as child crimes. Now, whether that was Weiner's sexting or something else, we don't know, but that was never made public. Former U.S. Vice President Joe Biden has returned to Instagram and has drawn 1 million followers, or we're being told he's getting 1 million followers, and that is fueling speculation he might be planning to run for president in 2020. Boy, have you noticed how totally subsumed our entire society is in the political process? This entire year has been all about the midterms. They're already talking 2020. You know, in other countries, there are actually limits to the campaign season. That the campaign season starts only so many months before the election, and then everybody's talking about politics, but the rest of the time, the government is there taking care of the country and its people, which we don't get a lot of here in this country. The hearings for Kavanaugh are now over, and it's pretty much assumed that he will be confirmed, but there is a little bit of a wrinkle. Apparently up in Alaska, Senator Lisa Murkowski may be forced to vote against Kavanaugh's nomination. And it has nothing to do with Murkowski being pro-choice and Kavanaugh being anti-abortion. The reason is that Murkowski's seat in the Senate was dependent on votes from Native Alaskans who are fiercely opposed to Kavanaugh's nomination. It was because of tribal communities that she won re-election in 2010. So if she hurts them, that may be the end of her political career. Now, in 2010, Murkowski lost the GOP primary to a Tea Party challenger. She then ran as an independent and started a write-in campaign, and to everyone's surprise, actually won the election because of the support of Alaska Natives. And she hasn't forgotten that. So we'll see what will happen with there. All right, a little bit of economic news. Bitcoin rival Ether is leading the 640 billion, with a B, cryptocurrency slump amid trading suspension. And I hate to say I told you so, but when Bitcoin and all this stuff started up, I kept saying it's got the smell of tulips around it, and it's looking like, sadly, that I was right. And I'm sorry for all those people who got burned in it. And if you don't know what I mean by smell of tulips, go on out on a search engine like DuckDuckGo and search for tulip mania. And it's history's first recorded instance of an out-of-control investment bubble that went boom, and it caused a huge amount of damage. Now, there's an article here from Information Clearinghouse, and it's responding to the latest claims that the economy created 200,000 new jobs in August, and they're all in these low-paid domestic service jobs, transporting and selling goods, ambulatory healthcare services, waiting tables, mixing drinks. There are no new jobs in manufacturing or in the high-tech, clean fingernail jobs that the neoliberal economists promised the American workforce in exchange for letting the industrial and manufacturing jobs go to Asia. That really didn't work on out. Now, the real mystery is how these jobs can possibly have been created when the Bureau of Labor Statistics household data is showing the civilian labor force declined by 469,000 in August, and that 692,000 Americans dropped out of the labor force in August. The numbers don't line up. We're being lied to again. Oh, my stars and garters. They're not being honest with us again over there in the government and the corporate media. They're fibbing. Now, you see a lot of people screaming about welfare cheats, and it's easy to make targets of them because they're at the lower levels of our economic system. But there's an article that came on out, again from Information Clearinghouse, saying it may be time to take a look at the real welfare cheats, and that is billionaires and ultra-wealthy corporations who are very quietly being given all kinds of government benefits at your expense. For example, Amazon's discounted rate with the Postal Service. Anyway, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about the economic news. And over at Zero Hedge, they have an article authored by Michael Snyder, who has his own blog called the Economic Collapse Blog. And like so many other analysts, he's saying the U.S. is headed for an economic problem. And it's not just the U.S. because of globalism. Much of the world is caught up in this global debt bubble. And we were talking about that last week. And the problem, the reason there is a global debt bubble is because so much of the world are enslaved to these private central banks, which, as I've explained before, they produce more debt than money with which to pay the debt. And the debt grows and grows and grows until the system comes down. Now, in the past, over the last 300 years that they've been playing this scam, when a nation with a private central bank collapsed, the other nations with private central banks would step on in and get them restarted. Keep the scam going, keep the people enslaved. But this article is underscoring something I mentioned a long time ago, that we could see the entire private central banking system around the globe come down all at once. And we're going to have to be ready with tar and feathers to make sure they don't try and start that scam up again. Because that's all it was, a legalized counterfeiting scam. But Snyder is saying this chapter of American history is not going to end well, and saying that the U.S. government has been incredibly foolish in the management of our national economy. And I don't know if foolishness is a good word for it. They've been greedy because they're aligned with their friends on Wall Street. And they're really not concerned about how you're doing. A lot of people have been chastising former President Obama because he's sort of broken with past tradition, which is where former presidents basically stayed quiet about their successors. But Obama's making the rounds out there. He's actually stumping for the Democrats for the upcoming midterms. And one of the things he's trying to do is take credit for the current economy, or at least how the current economy is being presented. It's being presented as a success. And Obama's saying, well, I did all of that, and you're seeing the result of the Democrats' effect here, and that's why you should vote for us again in November. So Obama's like a guy who couldn't open the jar for 8 years, then Trump opens it, and Obama's running around saying, well, I loosened it for you. So nobody's really taking him all that seriously on any of this stuff. Tomorrow, of course, is the anniversary of 9/11, and we're going to be spending pretty much the entire show talking about that. One of the aspects of 9/11 is how on September 10th, 2001, the Secretary of Defense got up there, Rumsfeld got up there, and acknowledged the Pentagon had lost $3.5 trillion. And it turned out it was actually a lot worse than that. Should have been the financial military scandal of the year. But fortunately for Donald Rumsfeld, the next day, 9/11 happened, and the media was off and chasing Osama bin Laden. And where all that money went just was sort of forgotten. Well, it's happened again. Reuters is actually reporting that the United States Army's finances are so jumbled up, it had to fudge its accounts by trillions of dollars to make the books look like they're balanced. Nobody knows if money went missing. Nobody knows where it all went. They just cooked the books to say, see, it's all balanced. There it is. And the Defense Department's Inspector General came out last June and said the Army made $2.8 trillion in wrongful adjustments to accounting entries in 1 quarter alone in 2015 and $6.5 trillion for the entire year. And the Army did not have receipts or invoices to support any of those numbers. They simply made them all up. So if you're thinking that the fact that we spend so much money on our military gives us an automatic advantage over countries like Russia and China that spend much less, it may be time to let that illusion go because of the huge amount of waste and corruption and fraud. The Pentagon is like a giant money motel. The money goes in, but it doesn't come out. And much of the money that has been poured into the defense establishment, mostly for offense, has been spent in all these other countries that the U.S. has been invading. So I'm not ready to assume that in a confrontation with Russia and China, the U.S. will automatically prevail. I'm actually very concerned that they won't be able to, and that they will resort to the nuclear arsenal. Anyway, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're going to talk about immigration and refugees and that kind of stuff here. Ann Coulter was on Tucker Carlson's show saying that Trump just needs to build the wall and not wait for Congress because we're being invaded, which is absolutely accurate. And Coulter said Trump's getting bad information from his staff and cited as an example the false claim Assad used chemical weapons on his own people, which she said was later shown not to be true. So I'm not the only one who's thinking that what we're seeing coming out of the White House is not necessarily Trump himself, but Trump being manipulated by those around him. Trump needs to remember he is the president, and he's got to put on those presidential brass knuckles. And he's got to start making some decisions here. He campaigned on stopping the illegal immigrants, and he's got to understand that the Democrats are counting on the illegal immigrant vote to retake Congress this November. And if they retake Congress, they're going to try and impeach him. And all the investigations into Obama and the FBI and the Department of Justice are all going to be shut down. Over at the Costa del Sol, apparently, there's been yet another boat crammed with migrants that washes up on the beach, and they all scurry on out and jump into a waiting van to be driven off. Vacationers are saying it's just happening on a regular basis. Okay, there's going to be another immigration rally at Chemnitz. Apparently a 22-year-old German national was killed late on September 8th in a clash with a group of Afghan citizens. And the German national was fatally stabbed in the city of Kothen, located in the Saxony-Anhalt state. And apparently 2 suspects, both Afghan citizens, have been arrested. So from the German point of view, they're being butchered like cattle and they're ready to start fighting back. Now, the anti-immigration party in Germany, to nobody's surprise, is surging in popularity. This whole open borders, New World Order thing is self-destructing. Because apparently a bunch of liberals funded by George Soros got together and said, wouldn't it be wonderful? Wouldn't it be nice? And didn't understand human nature and the ramifications of taking two different cultures and cramming them together. You can't change human nature. You can control it, and it does need to be controlled to have civilized society, but you can't change it. Where the liberal agenda, the liberal philosophy has failed is their belief that human nature can be changed. If you change the environment, you change the way the brain works. They honestly believe that. That when you are born, there is nothing in your mind to begin with. Nothing at all. That you don't inherit instincts from your ancestors. And that's why they keep messing up so much here. The German government, meanwhile, is getting ready for the Brexit. They're getting ready for all options, including no deal, which is looking more and more likely. In fact, the German military is now basically concerned about what may happen at their borders if there is a no-deal Brexit. Is it going to spark panic all across Europe here? All right, we're going to go to the phones here. Benedict in Iceland, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. What is on my mind is that the grand solar minimum has started.
Yes.
The 33-year cooling cycle has started also. And then we are in 400-year cycle on the sun, who also happened that the Swedes, the Scandinavians, so they will probably attack against. And the crop losses are now being published. The banks are probably counting their losses, and then we see it on the balance sheet, and the crash will start, just like 1929.
Yeah, very much so.
I don't think we can escape this one.
The difference, though, is that in 1929, the economies of different countries were still very much isolated and protected by their national borders. Today, it's very different, and we're seeing more and more people come on out and say, when this crash happens, it will be global. 2008 was the warning sign because of economic globalism. What should have been an America-only economic catastrophe turned out to be a disaster that spread all over Europe and almost brought down the entire Europe banking system.
I'm absolutely agree with you there. And I think as we can see it now in South America, this will spread now to Europe and all over the world. And I don't see any way we can avoid this.
No, there's no way you can avoid it because the banking system, based on private central banking, has to self-destruct. Because by its very design, it produces more debt than money with which to pay the debt. And what they can do is keep on creating new money to try and inflate the debt away, but it's just more debt. And the people who set up this system, they didn't care that it was going to blow up somewhere down the road. They enjoyed their lives of wealth and privilege and luxury, and they had lots of wild parties, and they thought life was really being very good, and they went to their graves perfectly happy with the lives that they had led. And completely unconcerned that somewhere down the road there has to be a crash that is going to hurt ordinary people. Because bankers don't care about ordinary people. Bankers care about money. That's why they're bankers.
I agree with you there. The last time when this happened in Europe, Europe went into 30-year war and half the population died.
Yes.
That's how bad it was. So we can expect a hell going loose, and we can see the pirates are starting now in Venezuela, but they will be all over Europe. Everybody who has boat will go try to find the food.
Yeah, I fear that you're right. I fear that you're right, and it's very frustrating for me because I've spent 1/3 of my entire lifetime trying to get the world off of this course toward a global war. And we've seen all these disasters like Gulf oil, Fukushima, that are straining an already overstressed food supply network. And I don't know, maybe the depopulation people are out there cheering for the war because, yes, let's kill off all the human beings and nature will return and it will be beautiful. Reminds me of one of the last Tom Clancy books I really enjoyed was called Rainbow Six. And that was actually the storyline where a bunch of ultra-rich people who'd become billionaires decided they didn't want to deal with ordinary ikipu human beings anymore, and they were going to start a major Ebola pandemic to which they were already immune. And they were just going to wipe out the majority of the human race and let nature come on back, and they just thought that was going to be beautiful.
There are all kinds of sick people.
Yes.
But Mike, keep the work up because you're doing a great job, and we need some sane person because this is gonna be a hell of a ride.
I'm afraid you're right.
Sorry,
I'm afraid you're right.
You heard about the Grimm stories, the German story, Grimm stories, Hans and Greta.
Oh yes.
But yes, that's what we are going into, eating each other.
Well, I thought they ate a witch, or the witch wanted to eat them. It's been a while since I was a kid. Anyway, Benedict, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go and switch over to Rick in Arizona. Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah. You hear me, Mike?
I hear you just fine.
Okay, good. Yeah, Trump got his Supreme Court decision that said he could block the Muslims from those 7 countries. That means that's settled law. He could ban anybody. And the wall, Mike, isn't going to stop the people from India or China or from anywhere else around the world, except what? A wall along Mexico? These Mexicans are not a threat to our national security. So,
but they're a threat to our economy. And they're a threat to our political system because they're voting and they shouldn't be. And they're a threat to the public health because they're sneaking through carrying diseases that had previously been eradicated in this country.
Hey, Mike, do you know that the Chinese carry hepatitis like you can't believe, but they don't say nothing about it? You know that half of China had hepatitis 50 years ago. Okay, there was a huge epidemic, and we don't hear anything about that. And the Mexicans were here long before the Chinese. But this wall thing to me is whatever. I don't know what a word for it. If you really want to stop the Mexicans from coming here, just pass a law that make the businesses can't hire them.
There is already a law that says businesses can't hire them. It's called Title VIII. And the problem is these laws are not being enforced. And that's really what it comes down to. You've got these mayors and these governors all across the country saying, we're a sanctuary city, come on in here, and we'll give you lots of free stuff, paid for by the legal citizens of this country.
Chinese are flooding the West Coast. Vegas and Southern California, it's all Chinese, man. People out there, don't kid yourself. There's nothing going on in immigration.
Okay, what is your problem with the Chinese? Okay, the Chinese are coming in. They're coming in through the legal immigration process. We're talking about illegal migrants coming up from Mexico, and it's estimated there's like 7.5 million so far, and every day there's more of them.
They're coming in here and they're paying for jobs. You know that? In Vegas they pay for their jobs.
That doesn't make any sense. They're not supposed to be working in the first place. And why would anybody pay for a job? Are they talking about bribing somebody to hire them? And again, it's a Title VIII violation. Okay. Now, I don't know that a wall is going to work so much as just getting the appropriate authorities to enforce the existing laws. We don't need any new laws. We've got the laws. They're on the books. Okay, they're not being enforced, and the Democrats have been blocking every step of the way. The Democrats want this country flooded with illegal immigrants because they can be counted to vote Democratic. And that's why it's just so totally out of control right now as they head into the November midterms. The Democrats are literally counting on the illegal immigrant vote to retake Congress. And that is a threat to the American way of life when you have people who are not supposed to be voting in this country being brought in to vote. It's election fraud on an absolutely massive, massive scale. And the illegal immigrant problem is a major problem. And I think it far outweighs whoever's coming in from China or India, who, by the way, if they're coming in as legal migrants, legal immigrants, they get a medical check. Okay, so the ones who have serious diseases do get turned back. Anyway, thank you for the call, Rick. We're going to let you go. And we're going to take another phone call from Dan in Illinois. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Quick. Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Okay, I just heard something funny. I got a good one. I seen a report this morning. Argentina devalued their currency to 16 cents on the American dollar. Now, how do you pay off millions and millions of dollars of American debt you owe to America with 16 cents at a time?
You don't. I mean, that's the problem. If, Venezuela's dollar-denominated debts have just become unpayable.
Yeah, this is Argentina. They're in the same boat, and it's and Brazil is going down, and
yep,
they shut the whole continent. And I remember a year or so ago, all these guys on the like Bloomberg and stuff like that, invest in Brazil.
Yep.
That's all they talked about.
Yeah, it was the emerging markets, but they're all going belly up.
Yeah, big time. But I just thought I'd bring that up. How do you pay off 16 cents on a dollar? You don't.
Nope.
So, and they're trying to get IMF loans to do it. So, I'll let you go.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And there may be an interesting aspect to this. The fact that other countries are having to devalue their currencies, it may mean that future loans to these countries may be in currencies other than the U.S. dollar. But this is happening around the globe, especially in the emerging markets. And again, it all goes back to that fraud of private central banking, where the banks are allowed to just literally create money out of thin air and then loan it into circulation at interest. And the instant that first pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, more money is owed to that private central bank than actually exists. And that is the trap. No matter how hard you work, no matter how much you sacrifice, the debt always outpaces the growth of the money supply. All right, back to the phones here. Lloyd in Arizona, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I wanted to comment on the immigration. The wall, to me, I think is a bad idea because, in general, governments have been tyrannical, especially ours. And so I don't believe that they think there is another enemy except for the American people. And so I'm pretty sure that's to keep us in, or, keep something in. And that's my opinion on it. But as far as, instead of a wall, we need to incentivize the people, or de-incentivize immigrants from coming through, the welfare system.
That's exactly right. You're exactly right. I mean, under Title VIII, all of these agencies that are giving money or food to the illegal immigrants, or giving them shelter, or transporting them, or giving them jobs, they're all in violation of the law. We don't really need that wall at all. What we need is for the law to be enforced. I mean, back when Eisenhower was president, he shut down the illegal immigration problem, just brought it to a complete halt. It was called Operation Wetback, which would have the liberals screaming about political correctness today. And he did it with only 1/10 of the current assets and resources of the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Anyway, Lloyd, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Over in Great Britain, as you know, the clock is running out on the Brexit. There is no deal. Chequers is dead. And it's looking more and more like there's going to be a no-deal Brexit, which is going to cause instant hardship in Great Britain because all of their trade with the rest of the European Union is about to get cut off. And that's going to lead to a lot of shortages. And so the police are bracing for potential riots. In fact, there's even talk of bringing the army in to help maintain order in the event of a no-deal Brexit. So it's kind of a doomsday forecast. I don't understand why the pro-Brexiteers are not already out there trying to set up new deals for trade ready to go into effect the instant Brexit happens. That's would make sense to me. Now, Boris Johnson is basically, he's under attack, a lot of smear job going on him, but he's out there saying that he doesn't think Theresa May will be in power for too much longer. And apparently Boris Johnson is thinking that he'd look pretty good at number 10 himself. Now, story coming out of Breitbart, 40% of Jews would seriously consider leaving Great Britain if Corbyn becomes prime minister. Well, I wouldn't get too worried. Look at all the celebrities who promised they would leave the U.S. if Trump won the election, and they're unfortunately, sadly, tragically still here. And I'm not the only one who's saying it's nonsense. Apparently, Professor Jonathan Rosenhead of the London School of Economics is saying it's ridiculous. It's nonsense. And of course, they're still pushing anti-Semitism, even though the Tories caved on in and adopted that ridiculous definition of anti-Semitism that says criticism of Israel's government is anti-Semitic. That is a dangerous, dangerous situation. Now, Subway sandwich shop, as you know, you go on in there, you pick out the meats you want, and you put your sandwich together. They sort of tend to be healthy. But apparently, 185 branches across Great Britain and Ireland have gone halal only. They are removing the ham and bacon from these 185 stores after strong demand from Muslims. Now, it's one thing for Subway to offer halal meals to cater to the Muslim customers who want them, but quite another to stop carrying the traditional ham and bacon the British and Irish want. That's taking this multiculturalism a little too far. Yes, let's be gracious hosts to the Muslims and say, we understand you don't like ham and bacon, and we're going to have that over here for our customers who do want the ham and bacon. But for the Muslims to come on in and demand that nobody be allowed to have ham and bacon at the Subway stores, that crosses a line. We'll be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I'm going to backtrack here a little bit. By the way, it's hour number 3. Everybody is still getting all caught up in who wrote the anonymous New York Times op-ed. And we mentioned earlier in the show where somebody claimed to know who it was and that it was a woman. And now we're seeing this article that came on out from the Political Insider with a second opinion. Trump's campaign manager is saying the anonymous New York Times author is a woman. And attention is now being focused on Fiona Hill. And Fiona Hill is the special assistant to the president and senior director for European and Russian affairs on his National Security Council staff. And more people are thinking that's who wrote this. So now we can let this go away. Getting on back to immigration and citizenship here. The Swedish anti-immigration party has adapted Trump's slogan. They're saying, make Sweden great again. And it's just a few weeks until the elections actually happened over this last weekend, and they did very, very well. They're now the country's second largest party. So the populists win the biggest ever vote share. The ruling leftists have the worst result in 100 years. So this open borders, refugees, immigrants thing, it's blowing up in the face of the New World Order people. And I imagine Soros is throwing a tantrum. Over in Texas, more illegal aliens were arrested for murder in the past 7 years in this one single state than deaths by mass shootings in the other 49 states combined. Now, when there's a mass shooting, it's headline news. But when these illegal aliens are murdering people, and they're doing it a lot according to the story. It's no big deal. It's no big deal. Apparently, a Guatemalan national in the United States illegally has been arrested for allegedly raping and trafficking an underage girl, also in this country illegally. And it goes back to that wonderful quote, when you start to import the third world, you get third world problems. Now, Angel's moms Mary Ann Mendoza and Vicki Lyon have called out Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, saying, get off your duff and fund Trump's border wall. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Sammy in Cape Cod, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I was just wondering, is there any creepy similarity between kosher foods and the halal ban with Subway?
I really would have no idea. I mean, I'm familiar with kosher food from my first marriage. I really would have no idea what constitutes halal.
Okay, good enough. A little check on the internet is they're pretty much synonymous. So it's just thanks for having me on the air. You're doing great. Thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Well, you learn something new every day. Well, then I don't realize what all the fuss is about. You know, it doesn't matter if you call it kosher or halal. People just get their knickers in a twist over just little tiny things. All right, let's talk about some science and health issues. And there's this story came out of the Daily Mail. There was research that was done involving 47,000 people over the age of 75. They were being given statins just in case. No indication they needed them. The doctors are writing the prescription, just take this just in case. And the latest research is saying they're wasting their time, they're wasting their money, they don't receive any benefit from this at all. It's just another marketing scam to push the product. Okay. U.S. lawyer Robert Kennedy Jr., in an interview in Euronews, funny how he gets a lot more exposure over in Europe than he does here in the United States, is saying that his organization is now in possession of documents about Monsanto's activities in Europe. And apparently lawyers who were involved in that California lawsuit, which wound up with Monsanto being ordered to pay $289 million in damages to this groundskeeper, they're saying they have these documents about Monsanto and what they're doing in Europe. And they're saying what we have is the tip of the iceberg. We have documents now in our possession, several hundred documents that have not been declassified, and some of these are explosive. So there's more and more coming on out about the reckless disregard for human health and safety in these giant mega corporations here. Now here's an interesting little article. This came out of USA Today, and it said, will growing scenes of hurricanes, wildfires, and volcanoes make us a go-bag people? Now, what they mean by that is having a bailout kit. Go-bag is a good phrase for it as well. And they're saying it has been a very rough year. Between all the storms that are out there, 3 hurricanes aimed at the Atlantic seaboard, 2 hurricanes more or less aimed at us, there's a lot of natural disasters. We had the volcano down on the Big Island, and that more and more people really ought to be prepared and have a bailout kit. And it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. Everybody should have some degree of prepping, and part of that prepping is having a kit that is ready to go to throw into the trunk of the car and leave when you have to. And what you have in that bag that goes in the trunk of the car is as much water as you can lift, freeze-dried food, extra medication, radio, batteries, all that stuff. You know the drill. You've been down there. What's really interesting is watching what happened here on Hawaii. We had Hurricane Lane, and it was headed our way. And people who were not preppers stormed the stores and panic bought everything they could. There were reports of price gouging. It was just a zoo down there. Claire and I made the mistake of doing our regular weekly shopping. It didn't even occur to us we were going to run into that. And we did. It was just insane there. Okay. So after Lane turned into lame, at least here on Oahu, those same people tried to take back all those supplies to get a refund, which caused a little bit of friction. And now that Olivia is bearing down on us, those same people are back at the stores again, panic buying. That's not how you do it, okay? You get storable food, and I mean long-term storable food in special containers. The containers the food comes in from the supermarket are not designed to last. You need to either look online or find a prepper store in your area and basically stock up on, water storage. Water's the most important thing. Possibly, if you've got room, an emergency generator. And it's just part of your permanent lifestyle. Now, speaking of Olivia, it is expected to be on top of us here on Oahu on Wednesday. So if we're off the air and you're hearing a best of tape, rather, that's the reason why. Because we're being told this will actually be a lot worse than Lane was for us here on Oahu. So as soon as this show is over, I'm going back on out to the prep shed and pulling out all the lanterns and getting everything ready to go again. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And if you've never been to Yellowstone, you ought to make a point of going. It really is one of the most beautiful places on Earth. And I know a lot of people are concerned about the supervolcano, and there is a concern, but no indication it's going to erupt in our lifetime. And if it is going to erupt, go see it now before it's gone. Now, one of the features inside Yellowstone is named Mount Doan. And it's named after this individual this Army Lieutenant Gustavus Doan, who basically led a massacre against the Pi'ikani people on the Montana River bank. And now the Native Americans are agitating, basically saying, we need to rename that mountain. It's been named for somebody who committed, massacres here on this land, and they shouldn't be honoring that man. Now, the reason they named it for him is that after the period of massacring Indians, he went on to become an explorer in the region, and that's why he got his name on the mountains. But the Native Americans they're not too happy about that. Okay. As you know, we had a situation last week where 4 aircraft showed up at airports with sick passengers in a very short interval of time. One of them turned out to be just a single case of cholera, and those people have been screened and let go. The others were a serious flu-like symptom, and everybody was going ballistic, saying, oh my goodness, it's the beginning of a biological warfare attack. As it turns out, on all 3 of the flights, 2 of them had come directly from near Mecca. The third was a continuation of a flight. Some of the passengers had basically flown out from Dubai to another airport, got into a plane, and came to the United States to make their connection. And apparently at this year's Hajj, there was a nasty flu bug that was going around, and a lot of people left the Hajj carrying it with them. So it's probably going to all parts of the world right now, which I'm sure the flu vaccine companies are saying, yee-haw, the yacht is paid for. But that is the source of all of this. And again, one of the problems of traveling by air is that passenger compartment, the air just recirculates and recirculates and recirculates, and there really isn't much of anything done to contain viruses and bacteria unless somebody is really obviously sick and then they're moved to another part of the aircraft, which doesn't mean the germs still are not circulating in that cabin air. Okay, now, apparently there was this lady, McKenna Denson, who traveled more than 700 miles from her home in Pueblo, Colorado, to attend a Mormon church service in Chandler, Arizona. And this particular service was a day of fasting and testimony at the church. And that's where everybody gets up and they testify. They testify about what's going on. And McKenna Denson got up and testified about how the church leader raped her more than 30 years ago. And she exposed him before his own congregation. And I mention this for those who claim I only pick on the Catholics, because this apparently is an issue across all religions. Now, this one is a little bit out there. Apparently, a Catholic priest has been arrested over claims that he raped a mentally handicapped victim of human trafficking in Latvia. And this all came down just ahead of a visit by the Pope, who's trying to find some way to shut this whole scandal down, because it's just gotten really, really bad this time. I mean, the Catholic Church has been dealing with these scandals for a very, very long time. In fact, some years ago, Claire had gotten a rather well-known Catholic institution, I'm not going to say which one, to start performing some of her original music. And then this Catholic Church had to shut down their music program because they got sued in one of these sex scandal things. Over in New York, the New York Attorney General has subpoenaed all New York Roman Catholic dioceses as part of their sex abuse probe. And this is having an impact. Catholicism has lost more of its faithful than any other religion in the United States. And according to the latest poll, 13% of American adults who are former Catholics say they now have no religion, or they went over to Protestantism or other beliefs, according to a survey by the Pew Research Center. And I can understand why. These scandals keep piling on up, and it is simply impossible to reconcile this kind of behavior with the claim that these clergy and nuns represent the human face of a supreme moral authority of the universe. And it is starting to cost them. It is wearing on them. But again, it's not confined to the Catholics. It just seems to be more of a problem there. But we've seen these incidents, again, in the Protestant churches, in Judaism. It seems to go with the job. And I remember there was a South Park episode, was called Red Hot Catholic Love. And there was this priest who was exhorting his fellow priests, saying, we've got to stop this. We can't go on abusing these children. And one of the other priests said, well, we just thought it was a perk of the job. So anyway, now getting on back to Johnny Bobbitt, and there's a happy ending to this story. Now, Johnny Bobbitt was the homeless veteran who helped a stranded woman who'd run out of gas. He went to the gas station, spent his last $20 to get a gas can full of gas, and got her sent home. And the one woman and her husband set up a GoFundMe to help this homeless veteran that raised $400,000. And that's where it got ugly. I guess the proximity of that much money under their control was a temptation they couldn't resist, because Bobbitt got very little of the money, and the rest of it now seems to be gone. Now, the woman and her husband were out there saying that they had to cut him off from any more of the money because he was just spending it on drugs, that he'd spent $75,000 on drugs. Well, knowing a little bit about the drug world, if he'd spent $75,000 on drugs, he would be dead. Now, the happy ending is GoFundMe is saying they're going to step on in. They're going to make sure he gets the full $400,000. So great for the people at GoFundMe. They stood up to the plate. And I hope this law firm, Cousin O'Connor, is going to continue to go after this woman and her husband. It probably started out with the noblest of intentions, and they probably figured they'd raise a few $100 and that would be it. But $400,000, I guess it was just too much of a temptation here. Now, the news is still going on about this tragedy that happened down in Dallas, where this off-duty Dallas police officer, going home after the end of her shift, walked into the wrong apartment. She walked into her neighbor's apartment, saw the man there, and just reacted and shot him. And obviously on administrative leave, but she is being charged with manslaughter. My question is, how is it she was able to just walk into this other guy's apartment? Did he just leave the door open? That's one part of the story that doesn't really seem to fit. And if she was able to just turn the knob and walk into this guy's apartment, wouldn't it have alerted her that her door should have been locked? So there's something kind of funny about the story, that it doesn't quite really fit. But that's what they're saying happened, and that's when why they're going with the manslaughter charge. So anyway, got to be really careful of those cops. Keep your doors locked. You know, and I know everyone views a world where you can leave your doors unlocked as an idyllic utopian paradise, and there have been times and places I've lived where that was actually realistic, because there was a lot of room around where we were living. And we could leave the door unlocked and just come and go. That's not realistic in an urban environment. It really, really isn't. Okay, this is an interesting little story. As you know, there has been this real push of the transgender agenda, of trying to get rid of the idea that there are male and female, and instead substitute this spectrum of sort of blended genders, and how we have to treat each and every single one of them as a privileged, protected group. Now it is being driven down to the education system at a very low level. More about that when we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're talking about the transgender agenda. Send something to control room here. So there's this article that came out from the BillMuhlenberg.com website, and it says that these activists are now targeting vulnerable children. And last week we had this story where researchers were saying that a lot of these kids who were saying they were transgender were simply persuaded, like peer pressure, or by these so-called trans activists. And they're not finding transgender children, they're trying to create them. They're grooming these vulnerable children to just be very, very confused about their gender identity. And again, I think that this is part of that whole New World Order of getting us so confused about who we are and what we are that we really can't function, and we're going to be easy to control. But they're basically down there hitting these vulnerable kids and trying to convince them they're not boys or they're not girls, there's something in between. Another story, this one coming out of the Daily Mail. Apparently, parents are threatening to keep their children home from school after the Little Lever School in Bolton, Greater Manchester, decided they were going to set up unisex toilets. And there's now a huge campaign against the unisex toilets, started on Facebook. Now, for adults, maybe. And I say that because when I was working on a film production in Rome, the company where I worked had a unisex bathroom, which was there were individual stalls where you went to do what you were going to do, and then there was a shared area where you washed your hands. And actually, it was a very, very pleasant environment. Okay? But for little kids, I think it's a little too soon. Anyway, we're going to take a caller on the line now. Ryan in Cleveland. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Can you hear me?
I hear you just fine.
All right, good. Well, I'm going to tell you, like three topics, but it's one topic in the same, and then I'll hang up and I'll listen to you. I do it that way best.
Okay.
The first one is, the guy spent 75 grand on drugs. You know what? I'm telling you, man, you can spend 75 grand in 1 month if you're a drug addict, because then you go to these so-called, like, bars where there's, like, nice ladies, and you spend lots of money on them, then you start buying drugs for them. Before you know it, 75 grand ain't nothing when you got 400 grand or whatever you got. And,
well, he didn't have the 400 grand, and the veteran is disputing that claim. He's saying, no, he first of all, he didn't get the 75,000 to begin with, and it doesn't really matter. Okay, the point is that this man and woman, they started out with this noble effort to try and, help this guy, and then when the money poured in to 400,000, it just got the better of them. I mean, the police have already raided their place and searched it, and apparently there was a suspiciously new BMW in the driveway that they towed away in the process.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. But what I'm saying is when you're saying, well, he has 70 grand to spend it, he'd be dead. No, not necessarily. He'd be doing his drugs all month, but all of a sudden he has a lot of drug friends because they realize he has money, and then the girls at the club, they love him, and it's pretty easy to spend that much money when you got that kind of money, especially when you're a drug addict and you haven't had it. But, though I agree with you, they probably did steal it, but he wouldn't be dead necessarily. The other thing is, with the drugs, the one thing is, in 1917 or 1919, they actually had to pass a constitutional amendment to outlaw alcohol. So how the federal government can outlaw any other kind of drug without passing a constitutional convention is beyond me, which means all these federal drug laws, to me, are unconstitutional. And the third one is... if you legalize drugs and you sold like cigarettes or beer, you would have a lot less people dying, because the biggest factor is when you go out to buy drugs, you go to the corner and there's like who stands on the street corner, and you have no idea what's in that drug. You're just hoping it's good. So then these people end up dying because either there's bad drugs in there, bad stuff in there they added to it, or it's so pure, the drug addict that's buying it most times says, well, it's not that pure, so I'm going to have to smoke more than you would, or shoot up, or what you're going to do. And then he overdoses because it's more pure than he realized it. And then
well, you're right on that last one. You're right on that last one here. And there are a lot of countries where drugs are basically decriminalized, and they don't have the problems that we have with the war on drugs. Because drugs don't cost all that much. There's no profit motive, and so you don't have people hanging around the schoolyard trying to give free samples to kids to get them hooked. Okay, Ryan dropped, which is fine. We're coming up now on a commercial break, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Stay tuned. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go right to the phones here. James in Ohio. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I kept wondering, or I was, about why they keep pushing these poison gas attack hoaxes, and then the Skripals too. And then it hit me, because it worked so well the first time.
Actually, it didn't work all that well the first time. In fact, to be very honest, ever since Saddam's nuclear bombs turned out not to exist, every one of these false flags has gotten off to a rocky start. But they keep doing them because they can't think of anything else to do.
What I mean is that poison gas, a fake poison gas, is kind of a holy idea to these people. Because when I say the first time, I mean like in post-World War II, the fake poison gas really went over well. It was like the keys to the whole world. And the other thing, I watched Alex Jones's show Sunday, and I was actually pleasantly surprised. I'm beginning to think the censorship is having a good effect on it. He actually mentioned that Israel was involved in some skullduggery or other. I didn't catch which one, but he also went into the Kalergi plan for more than a couple minutes. And then Owen Schroyer comes on, takes over, and talks about the Jewish central banks moving into Arabia. I wonder if these are just mistakes or accidents because of the stress, or if they're actually shifting their tune a little bit.
Well,
maybe they realize being on Team Zion is no guarantee of safety.
I think it may be more of the latter, because Alex Jones right now may be feeling very, very betrayed because he's been a loyal supporter of Israel all these years. And if you look at top management at all these social media companies, it's the same sort of individuals we have in the regular corporate media. And so now Alex is probably feeling very much abused, and that there should have been a little bit more gratitude. But, they're making an example out of Alex Jones, and then at some point they're probably going to come after the rest of us.
Right, absolutely. The people walking around talking about these things, the conflicts between government and citizenry, like it's a sporting event or something. It's really not. I think, if we don't straighten things out, we're pretty much going to suffer Soviet / cartel / whatever, jihadi atrocities, at the point of a blade or worse. So,
these are dark times. There's no two ways about that. And I still think there's a crash of the American empire coming, and it may be bad enough with its global ramifications to basically send us into a new dark ages.
Right. Yeah. I think that's, for quite a while, I've realized that I think the people at the top think that a post-apocalyptic scenario is the best for them. They have the king's purse worldwide, so they could create a city somewhere that's safe, or whatever technology. They probably are generations ahead of us in undisclosed technology too. So,
well, any nation with a military is ahead of the civilians. The military always try and keep their technology at least 15 to 20 years ahead of what's in the civilian market. By the time military technology reaches the civilian market, it's obsolete and useless, which is why I keep saying that if we're going to find that next new thing to revive our manufacturing and our economy, it's going to come out of the space program.
Yeah. Well, that's about all I have for you. Thanks for your time, and everybody should support Mike and Republic Broadcasting. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the kind words. And we're going to switch over to Daniel in British Columbia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Michael. I wanted to add something to that Johnny Bobbitt, the homeless guy story there. If this guy was going to blow $75,000 on drugs, why did he give his last 20 to that woman to begin with for the gas?
Good point.
I mean, the druggies I know would take that and put it up their arm or whatever.
You raise a very good point.
Yeah, another thing about the female cop that shot the black guy. I was following that story a little bit, and I don't know if it's confirmed, but the door had a fob. When you go up to the door, you put the little fob, and it turns green if it's your house, and it goes red. So I don't know if this is 100% confirmed. I was on this forum, and someone on Twitter was mentioning it. She didn't have the key to get in. It was probably locked, and this guy probably thought to himself, "Who the heck is trying to, rustle my doorknob at 11:30 at night?" And she probably heard the footsteps coming up to the door and thought, "Who the hell's in my apartment?" Drew her firearm, and the guy opened the door and possibly got shot right there. I don't think he left his door unlocked. It was probably one of those doors that automatically locks like a hotel, judging by the look of the apartment. It was like a brand new apartment.
Okay.
She's only been living there 3 months. So it just adds a little bit. I'm glad the Texas Rangers are taking over the investigation, but to say that, she shot him because he was black, I don't believe that.
Yeah, I was seeing that all over the place here, and yeah. No matter what happens, grab it and make an issue out of it. Oh, it's racist. It's racist. That's the liberals' favorite word right now.
It could have been something to do with her training. It wouldn't be the first time. I'm not saying, women cops draw their guns before, asking questions, but she was pretty new on the force, so she probably got spooked thinking, like, who's in my apartment? She was on the wrong floor, so they all look alike. She just went up one floor or down one floor from what she thought was hers. And that's the end of story. I mean, manslaughter. If they don't give her, the minimum sentence, they'll say, oh, racism. And I don't know. So I just thought I'd add that. It wasn't a key, and I don't think she walked into an unlocked door and just started wandering around, because she would have recognized her place right away. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. The instant the door was open, would have realized it was not her place. So
I think it happened right at the door.
Yeah, I think that does make sense.
Okay. All right. Have a good show. Thanks.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Okay, we're talking about political correctness and just how out there they're getting. Apparently, this junior high in Ohio had a diversity exercise. And apparently students were asked to choose certain types of people to leave behind on a doomed Earth while others escape on a spaceship. And parents were complaining about this, and the school is saying that this exercise aligned with the goals of the school district to promote tolerance and break down stereotypes. And so this Whom to Leave Behind exercise was given to students at Roberts Middle School in Cuyahoga Falls last month, telling them to select 4 people from a hypothetical list of 12 to leave behind, as tomorrow the planet Earth is doomed. Adding, of course, that the remaining 8 would then be passengers on a spaceship to another planet. Now, call me old-fashioned, but when I went to school, we learned about things like mathematics, how to write, how to spell, how to think. We learned skills, how to make things. Later on, how to repair your car. I look at education today with all this stuff about diversity training and transgender, and I'm convinced there is a deliberate plan to produce uneducated children in our schools district, our school system. The kids are going to be convinced they've got an education because they got that little piece of paper that says they graduated. But they don't know how to think, they don't know how to analyze, which is exactly what the government wants. But at the same time, it means they're not equipped to compete with children in other countries entering the high-tech job market. And that may be one of the reasons why U.S. corporations are pushing so much for those H-1B visas, is they understand that college graduates here in the U.S. just don't have the knowledge and skill set that graduates from other countries have. All right, Donald Trump is now ramping up his war on social media and basically wagging his finger at them rather mightily. But he is basically saying that Attorney General Jeff Sessions needs to start talking with the state attorney generals later this month to discuss these concerns about how conservatives are being banned. And the conservative bias is there. The hearings danced around the issue, the hearings with the Twitters and Facebook CEOs and COOs, but mostly they tried to divert that whole issue onto, we're protecting against foreign meddling and Russian interference. And really skirted the issue about bias for us American posters who use those services. And unfortunately, the fact that Sessions is involved tells me that nothing is likely to be done, and certainly not before the November elections here. But what's really interesting is both sides in this debate are crying free speech and protecting our democracy. And it is very Orwellian to hear these social media giants say that they're protecting democracy by shutting down free speech they don't agree with. Because the liberals are still all over the place. They're not being blocked or banned. It's only the conservative voices. That's not freedom of speech. That's permitted speech. That's biased speech. So you have all this corporate media claiming they're standing for freedom of speech, and you have us in the independent media practicing freedom of speech. And the corporate media is trying to say it's on an equal footing. No, it isn't. There's a very obvious and visible difference going on here. The corporate media is trying to shut the independent media down. The independent media is not trying to shut the corporate media down. We're just going to sit on back, watch them continue to lie to the American people and destroy their own audience. Over in China, they're now tightening their internet controls, supposedly to take out rumors and fake news disseminated online and control what Beijing considers disinformation. In other words, government censorship of the internet. It is unfortunately coming, and we need to start thinking about finding a new paradigm to communicate with each other. The other day I mentioned Usenet, and I got an email from somebody reminding me that Usenet used to run on the ISP servers. That's where it would go. And it was under attack because of copyright violations, which was bad. But it was finally shut down with a smear campaign saying that it was a haven for child pornography. And whether the child pornography was there, I personally don't know. And if it was there, was it planted to make the smear work? But Usenet was shut down. But Usenet does not have to be on the ISP's servers. Some smart programmer out there could look at making Usenet as a peer-to-peer client, the way Skype originally was back when it worked well. Where if you're running Usenet on your machine, you're bucket brigading and passing information along. And it's not going through a central collection point where it can be filtered. We can get around government censorship. We just have to think very carefully about how to do it. The Department of Justice is announcing charges against North Koreans over the Sony hack, which was not a hack. It was an internal leak like the DNC. Now, they've identified a North Korean they say is behind the WannaCry attack. This, I don't know. If the guy they've got actually was behind WannaCry, or this is just another attempt to bash North Korea. And the reason I say that is because if you look at how completely impotent the U.S. government, the NSA, have been at finding any of the actual authors of any of this actual malware, the idea that they managed to succeed in this one case does stretch credibility a little tiny bit. Okay. Now, I hope this works. I hope this works. But apparently, up in San Francisco, they're launching what they're calling the Pac-Man that will gobble up plastic from the Great Garbage Patch. It's a 600-meter-long floating tube that sits on the surface of the water with a tapered 3-meter-deep skirt attached below to catch plastic waste. And it relies on the power of wind and waves to just autonomously sweep through the area, gathering up plastic waste as it goes. I hope it works. Now, a lot of people, they keep hearing about that garbage patch, the Great Garbage Patch, and they have this image of a spot in the Pacific where you could literally walk across the water. It really isn't that bad, but it is bad, and it is harmful to ocean life. And so, good for the people who designed this. I hope it works, and if it does, I hope they build a bigger one, because we do have to take care of our planet. It's the only one we've got, and that means environmental consciousness and responsibility. It means an end to these highly destructive wars that are really destructive of the environment, especially those depleted uranium munitions and biological weapons that could mutate and get out of control. But it is alarming how many of our leaders are just completely unconcerned about things like that in their rush for more wealth and power. We'll be right back after this commercial break with the last segment of today's show, so stay tuned and we will be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to our show, final segment of our program today here, and a reminder, tomorrow we're going to be talking pretty much exclusively about 9/11, the reasons to doubt the official story, how often 9/11 has been waved around as an excuse to justify invading yet another country. And so we're going to be focusing on that very tragic anniversary there. Now, a little bit of good news. SpaceX has done it again. Earlier today, a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket successfully launched the Telstar 18 Vantage communication satellite into orbit, and basically got it into orbit successfully, and then the Falcon 9 came on back down and successfully landed on its legs on SpaceX's drone ship, which is named, of course, I Still Love You. I am so happy that they've gotten this all to work. And good for them. Good for them. So, if I were young, I'd send them a resume. A lot of seismic activity has been going on over the last couple of weeks. We had that magnitude 6 quake hit Hokkaido. At least 37 people killed there. There was a series of quakes in Panama, Ecuador, and Chile that all occurred within an hour of each other. And a lot of people started wondering if maybe the Pacific tectonic plate is getting ready to experience a major shift. And I noticed earlier today I was getting little alerts about other earthquakes that are happening. So despite what the U.S. Geological Survey is saying, to me, it does seem like we're seeing an elevation in seismic activity. Now, why might that be? I don't think it's because Cthulhu is hatching out from the interior of the Earth, but there is a thought. Over the last several years, contrary to the claims of the global warming hysterics, Earth is actually cooling. And that means the surface of the Earth is cooling. And that means it's going to be shrinking. And that means there's going to be less pressure on those fault zones, keeping them from slipping. Now, that's just a theory that popped into my head. But there is something going on. And we might want to be paying attention to that. And finally, interesting little story. Remember The Wizard of Oz? Judy Garland wore those ruby slippers. There were actually multiple pairs of them. One of them had been stolen 13 years ago from a museum in Minnesota in Judy Garland's hometown. And it looked like an inside job. The alarms weren't working. The cameras weren't working. Somebody just came in the back door, smashed the case, and took them. Expedition Unknown did a segment on it, and apparently as the result of a sting operation involving somebody who wanted to sell the slippers back to the insurance company that had made good on the insurance policy, they recovered them. So a little bit of Hollywood memorabilia is now back safely at home, and I'm sure they've got much better locks and better cameras operating there now. By the way, speaking of human-caused global warming, there is now snow atop of Pikes Peak. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. And like I said, get ready for the storm that is coming in middle of this week. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here and share it with everyone that you know, especially the part about how social media, the big social media, are censoring conservatives and conservative points of view. It's time to get off social media, start going back to email lists, face-to-face contact, bring back the sneaker net. We'll see you tomorrow. Aloha, America.